3 days after I gave birth, my mother-in-law set a check on my hospital blanket and told me to choose. I had a daughter asleep in the crook of each arm. Behind her stood my husband's girlfriend, holding a diaper bag like she already owned the house. Vivian uncapped her black fountain pen. "Take $22 million and sign it. I only want the children." I looked at the divorce papers, looked at my girls, and signed. Then I did the one thing none of them planned for. I picked up my daughters and walked out the door. By the time their lawyer woke the next morning, the most expensive signature Vivian Hartwell ever bought was already worth nothing. I'm Bianca, 33, an actuary, the woman this family liked to call just a calculator. This is the story of the night they paid me to vanish, and the morning they learned what I actually do for a living. Drop a comment and subscribe. I price the things people would rather not think about. How long a body lasts, how much care costs at the end, what a promise is worth 20 years after someone makes it. I'm an actuary. For 9 years, I sat in quiet rooms building the math that tells insurance companies whether they can keep their word. It doesn't photograph well, but it's honest, and it kept me grounded long before I ever needed grounding. My father sold insurance out of a storefront in a town with one stoplight. He died when I was 26, and the last useful thing he taught me was short. The numbers don't lie, Bianca. People do. Learn the difference. So I did. I learned to stay calm when a column refused to balance. That panic is just bad arithmetic in a hurry. When coworkers got loud in meetings, I stayed flat. I don't get loud, I used to tell them. I get accurate. The Hartwells found that hilarious. To them, I was the numbers girl who married up. A desk ornament Spencer brought home from a conference. They never once asked what I was good at. That was their first mistake, though it would take a long time for them to feel it, because even before I married into that family, Hartwell Providence published figures never sat right with me. I told myself it wasn't my company. I was wrong about which half of that sentence would matter. I met Spencer Hartwell at an industry conference in Hartford. He was charming in the way that costs nothing, and I mistook ease for warmth. He told me his family ran a long-term care insurer his late father had built. He did not tell me his mother ran him. We married in 18 months. I kept my job and my maiden name on my licenses, out of habit more than foresight. The first time I walked into Hartwell House, the estate on the hill above town, I understood my place within 10 minutes. Vivian greeted me with a cheek that never quite touched mine, and a smile that failed somewhere along the way. The whole house smelled of her lavender, so heavy it seemed to coat the walls. Walter, her husband, had died years before, and his portrait hung over the stairs like a man still presiding. Vivian ruled in his name. The board did what she said, and so did Spencer. I learned to be pleasant and forgettable at their dinners, which suited me fine. I'm not a performer. For 3 years, I told myself the coldness was just old money being old money, that I was the outsider slowly becoming inside. I'm good with numbers, but I've sold myself worse math than that. Then I got pregnant, and Vivian started smiling at my belly instead of through me, resting a hand there without asking, and calling the twins the 5th generation. That was the first thing about her that scared me, and I didn't yet know why. People think a betrayal blindsides you. Mine didn't. I read the signs early, because reading risk is my whole trade. Spencer started working late, then later, then with a softness in his voice on the phone he never used on me. A man's tone is data too. Then the money moved. A transfer left our joint account for a sum that matched no bill we had, routed to an account I'd never seen. When I asked him about it plainly, he said it was a company thing and looked at his plate. I do not believe plates. So I did what I do. I hedged. I opened an account in my own name and moved a quiet cushion into it. I made copies of our financial records, the mortgage, the brokerage statements, the policies, and kept them somewhere only I could reach. I packed a bag for the hospital, and a second bag I told no one about, the kind you keep by a door. I even started reading Hartwell Providence public filings again at night, telling myself it was nervous habit. None of it felt like paranoia. It felt like underwriting. You don't hedge because you're sure the storm is coming. You hedge because you can't afford to be wrong if it does. The one thing I couldn't do was close the joint account alone. It needed both signatures, and the day I would have forced the issue was the day my water broke. I hedge for a living. I never thought I'd be hedging against my own husband. The twins came on a Tuesday, 8 minutes apart. I named them Posey and Wren before anyone could weigh in. Small names, mine. Nothing that rhymed with 100 years of Hartwell men. Spencer arrived late, smelling faintly of someone else's perfume. My old mentor, Ruth Vandermeer, a retired actuary who'd once worked inside a state regulator's office, drove an hour and stayed. I gave my daughters my last name on the birth certificates. Not Hartwell. A small, stubborn instinct. 3 days in, the smell of lavender walked into my room, and it wasn't alone. Vivian, then Spencer, then a young woman named Sloane setting a diaper bag on my chair like claimed territory, then attorney Garrett Pruitt with a folder, divorce papers, a settlement, and a relinquishment of my daughters to their grandmother. "You were never family, dear," Vivian said, almost gently. "You were a line item." She slid the check across my blanket. $22 million for 2 signatures. Cheapest thing I'll buy all year. Sign, and you're free and rich and gone. Don't, and my lawyers will spend a decade explaining to a judge why an actuary obsessed with money is unfit to raise Hartwell heirs. I understood instantly why 2 infants were worth $22 million to her. Walter had tied the family trust and chairmanship to his bloodline, and 2 healthy, 5th-generation heirs raised under her hand meant she held the dynasty another 20 years. While she talked, I ran 3 numbers in my head. A signature on a hospital bed isn't a court order. Real relinquishment requires a judge. Nobody can buy a child, since custody is decided by a court on the best interest standard, not a checkbook. And I was their mother, with no order anywhere forbidding me to walk out with my own newborns. If I refused, they'd outspend me for years. If I signed, I'd walk out with $22 million, my daughters, and a paper they thought was a cage and I knew was confetti. I clicked her pen and signed my married name for the last time. I waited until the floor went quiet, called Ruth, and we drove 2 towns over to a furnished apartment in Bellhaven I'd leased a month earlier under my own name, telling no one. On the ride, I drafted in my head a formal notice revoking the relinquishment under duress to go out by registered mail at opening. I wasn't running from the Hartwells. I was repositioning, moving my daughters out of reach before the floor dropped on them instead of us. By morning, the panic was all on their side. Pruitt discovered the relinquishment had nowhere to file, no court order, no oath, just a paper signed in a hospital bed with a mistress in the room, close to the textbook definition of duress. By 9 a.m., my registered letter was already moving through the mail. Vivian called at 10, her voice missing its usual marble for the first time ever. "Bianca, let's be reasonable." "I am being reasonable," I said. "I'm keeping my daughters and your money." I hung up. I hired Marin Cole, a family attorney who told me plainly the relinquishment was unenforceable, but warned the Hartwells could drag a custody war 3 years and outspend me, hiring someone to paint me as cold and unstable. So I win slow and bleed the whole time? Or you find a way to make them want this over more than you do? I stopped thinking like someone fighting on their field. For a few weeks, I considered the easy revenge, Spencer and Sloane's careless affair, hotel charges, a jeweler, a forwarded message thread. I could have blown it open to the board, to Vivian's church friends. It would have felt good for a weekend. But humiliating Spencer would only humiliate Spencer. Vivian would survive a scandal, same as she'd survived worse. None of it touched the actual threat to my daughters, which was never the affair, it was the money. I put the file in a drawer. My daughters were only safe as long as the Hartwells lacked the power to grind me down, and that power had exactly one source: Hartwell Provident, the company. Take the river away, and Vivian was just a frightened old woman with a fountain pen. I pulled my copies of their statutory filings and started reading Hartwell Provident the way my father taught me. Slowly, suspiciously, from the bottom up. Long-term care insurers must hold reserves, a mountain of money set aside today against tomorrow's claims. Actuaries test it yearly. Hartwell's reserves were thin, their loss assumptions rosy past fantasy, their lapse rates numbers no real population produces. They looked healthier than any peer, and that was exactly the problem. Health like that isn't earned, it's manufactured. That manufactured profit was the river. That river was Vivian's power. That power was the threat to my girls. Among the financial records I'd copied before leaving was an internal asset adequacy worksheet from Spencer's home office. 2 columns, the reserve filed with the state and the reserve the company's own analysis said it actually needed. An enormous gap between them, with Spencer's handwriting in the margin. Hold the line through the rate filing, initialed by him and the company's appointed actuary. It was a lead, not a weapon. I'd have to rebuild that gap myself from public filings alone, the honest way, until my numbers stood without that stolen page. My anger had started personal, but you can't stare at a reserve shortfall that size and keep it personal. Behind it were thousands of real policyholders, mostly elderly, who'd paid Hartwell Provident every month for 30 years, trusting the money would be there. Vivian had gambled their care to look richer, to buy a bigger house and a daughter-in-law's silence. My revenge grew up. Not an affair to expose, but a fraud, run through the exact machinery built to catch it, so no amount of money could call it a jealous woman's tantrum. Ruth taught me the regulatory map. A credible, documented solvency concern goes to the state insurance department, which can open a financial examination, demand working papers, and if reserves prove inadequate, petition a court for supervision, then rehabilitation, then liquidation if it can't be righted. You won't have to do anything to them, she said. You'll just have to show the right people the truth, and the truth will do it. Then came the long part nobody films, the weeks where revenge looks exactly like homework. I used some of the Hartwell money for the only thing it was good for, buying me the time and tools to do this properly. I licensed the data I needed, bought the industry tables, rented a desk and a quiet office so I wasn't building a fraud case at a kitchen table. Night after night, while Posey and Wren slept in the next room, I rebuilt Hartwell Provident's true reserve position from the ground up, using only what the public could see. Their filed statements, the standard actuarial guidelines every company has to follow, the mortality and lapse studies the profession publishes. I didn't cut a corner because I knew who would eventually read it. I tested my assumptions, then tested them against harsher ones, then documented every step the way you do when you expect a hostile expert to come at you with a flamethrower. The perfectionism that had made me lonely my whole life, the inability to ever let a number be close enough. For the first time, it was exactly the right disease to have. When I finished, I had a reserve adequacy analysis any regulator in the country could pick up and follow line by line. A shortfall in the hundreds of millions, built so cleanly that even Hartwell's own appointed actuary, the man who'd initialed that page, wouldn't be able to call it a guess. Spencer found me before I filed, trying 3 men on me in 20 minutes, the husband who missed me, the negotiator with a bigger number, and finally, when neither worked, the one Vivian had raised. You need to stop digging, Bianca. Whatever you think you're doing, just stop for your own good. He never mentioned custody once. A man fighting for his children leads with his children. He led with stop digging because his own initials sat on a page he prayed I'd never understood. Vivian came last, alone, to a coffee shop, and for a few minutes she was a widow instead of a chairwoman, telling me how Walter built the company from 2 desks, how the reserves first went thin in a bad industry stretch years ago, how she'd papered over it just until things turned, and they never turned, and she couldn't bear to let his name be disgraced. For a moment I felt the pull of it. Then she set her cup down. Those girls are Hartwell's, Bianca. You were a line item. Line items don't get a vote. The widow vanished. The chairwoman remained, so I filed a formal report and written complaint to the state insurance department. The reserve shortfall, the methodology, every step reproducible, my name and credentials attached because I wasn't hiding. Ruth reviewed the cover letter and changed 2 words. I drove it to the post office myself, kept every receipt, and sat in my car afterward feeling my hands finally stop shaking. It was the quietest thing I'd ever done, and it was going to be the loudest. The department moved fast. Within weeks, the state opened a financial examination of Hartwell Provident, demanding working papers that couldn't match what they'd filed. Rumors started. The company's manufactured health began to shake. Spencer stopped coming to the office. Vivian called it a formality. Sloane, watching the man she'd chosen go pale, started asking exactly how the Hartwell money was made, then stopped answering his calls, then vanished, off to find a more solvent fortune, having fallen for a balance sheet that was being seized. Vivian, drowning, summoned me to the company's annual policyholder meeting downtown. Vintage Vivian, still certain a number or a threat could move me. I said yes, not because she had power over me, but because I wanted to stand beside the truth as it landed. The hall was full of gray-haired policyholders, some on canes, one woman near the front clutching her own statements like a life raft. Vivian stood at the podium in pearls and lavender, her fountain pen beside her notes, and began her 100-meeting voice, strong, 4 times, when the side door opened and a state examiner walked in with a leather folder, announcing that following the financial examination, the commissioner had petitioned the court and placed Hartwell Provident under supervision. New business suspended, effective immediately. Vivian broke. She gripped the podium, voice climbing shrill, calling it a conspiracy, pointing at me across the room. "This is her, my son's wife, a spiteful," and snatched up the fountain pen to sign something, anything, her hand shaking so badly the nib only smeared black across the page. I walked to the front, unhurried. "I told you," I said quietly, "I don't get loud, I get accurate. You said I was never family, just a line item. You were right. So I read the whole ledger, and the line that doesn't balance is yours. $22 million for 2 signatures. You called it the cheapest thing you'd buy all year. It turned out to be the most expensive, because the only thing it bought was a motivated actuary with time on her hands." The woman clutching her statements stood and asked the only question that mattered. "Is our care money safe?" Vivian had no answer. She'd spent 20 years making sure she'd never need an honest one. So I gave it. The company hadn't set aside enough, that was real, but the supervision was the rescue, not the disaster. And I explained how rehabilitation and state guarantee associations exist precisely so a widow on a fixed income doesn't lose the care she paid 30 years for. For once in that company's 100 years, someone at the front of the room was on their side. Hartwell Provident moved from supervision into formal rehabilitation, its books pried open, the manufactured fortune evaporating overnight. The trust Vivian had fed with dividends from a hollow company faced clawback. Hartwell House slipped away from her. Walter's name, the legacy she'd lied for 20 years to protect, appeared in every regional headline beside the word fraud. Spencer faced his own professional reckoning for initialing a knowingly false reserve filing. Sloane was long gone. Pruitt's airtight wall had been the weakest in the building. The custody question, the thing that started it all, ended almost as an afterthought. A real judge applied the only standard that counts, the best interest of 2 little girls. The hospital bed relinquishment never had a chance. No judge, no oath, a mistress in the room, textbook duress. Their father was mired in a fraud investigation and had never once fought for them. Posey and Wren stayed with me. My settlement held too, since the money came from the family's own trust and personal assets, not the insurer. And the court severed the poisoned custody term from the negotiated property division I'd affirmed with open eyes. The receiver, untangling the wreckage, needed actuaries who understood Hartwell Provident from the inside, and after being walled off from anything touching my own case, I was retained as an outside consultant, my work reviewed by an independent actuary the court trusted. I used part of that clean money to backstop the servicing operation, so the claims kept getting paid. So the widow in the front row still got her care. I sign those checks now, honestly, at what used to be Walter's company, while Vivian watches from the outside with nothing. I took back my own name. We are the Toomey girls now, all 3 of us. They were so sure the dangerous person in that hospital room was the one with the money and the lawyer and the heavy black pen. They never once considered the quiet one in the bed, the one who already knew that numbers, like children, were never theirs to buy. That's how it ended. A fountain pen that wouldn't write, a ledger that wouldn't balance, 2 little girls asleep under the name that was always theirs. If you'd have signed too, then walked out and read the numbers, you already understand exactly what I did and why. Tell me in the comments which line you'd have read first. Share this with someone who spent their whole life being underestimated, and subscribe, because around here, calm always gets the last word.